All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Hunting Public Podcast. We got our new air traffic controller headsets on, trying to look cool and be
audio
cool.
Mixer, new headphones, 2 camera angles, over-the-top production.
Yeah, we're just blowing money on all kinds of stuff. So hopefully it's worth it, and we can bring you guys a little better audio quality with this stuff. On today's episode, we're going to be doing another one of these hunt breakdowns for you guys, and this hunt is going to be Greg's successful kill, November 16th, self-filmed. All right, Greg, let's get to some background first before we get into the hunt.
Yeah, starting with the big picture, the time of year. It's the middle of November, peak breeding. Most people call it the lockdown phase of the rut, which is usually thought of to be a tougher part of the rut to hunt. But in our experience over the past 5 years of hunting public land in Iowa, is that this time frame has actually been when we see or encounter the most mature bucks and harvest most of our bucks. I mean, look at last season with our friends here in Iowa. Besides Luke Nissen shooting his buck on November 1st, everybody else shot theirs somewhere between the 10th and the 20th. I mean, based on our experience in these past years, if I had just a week of vacation to hunt the rut, at least in this region, I would definitely be taking it during that time frame, or at least most of it during that time frame.
I don't know if it's just on public land or what, because you always hear people preach about the first week of November being really good, and we've had success, the first couple of days of November. I think it's the pressure aspect of it, because on public land, it seems like a lot of folks take their vacation in early November. So you get non-residents, residents all traipsing around out there, and it kind of messes things up a little bit. But by the middle part of the month, like Greg just mentioned, the pressure's starting to slack off, and the bucks are obviously still right in the middle of the rut. Your action tends to pick up throughout that time and stays that way clear through Thanksgiving. Greg's got his yak going here.
Just got out for my morning hunt, and I'm actually going to go to another location this afternoon. It was kind of a disappointing, slow morning. Saw one 2-year-old buck, and that makes 2 sits now in the past week to 10 days that I've had in here during the prime part of the rut, and I've seen a total of 1 deer. And on my way out here, I've been following the shore looking for footprints to see if there's been a lot of hunting pressure in here, and sure enough there is. There's several sets of tracks going in and out right here, and this is just a couple hundred yards from where I've been hunting. So I'm guessing that.
Had those people that have been walking in there, were they coming in from land access or boat access?
It was boat access, actually.
Really?
Yep. But this brings up an interesting point. A question that we get every now and then is, how do you determine what is too much pressure on public land to where you move on? Obviously, there's boot tracks in the mud where I could see people have been going in and out quite a bit. My trail camera had a card stolen out of it, and after having sat it November 9th and then the 16th with really good weather days and only having seen 2 deer, so yeah, it was time to move on.
That's what you got to do, especially if you're hunting in the rut. That's what we've noticed in the past on public land anyway. Like if you run into pressure and you're not in the spot where the action is happening, you got to pick up and move.
That kayak is really handy. It's a 10.5 footer.
It's a perception.
Perception sound, 10.5. It's got enough room. I can get tree stands, sticks, backpacks, bow. The only thing it won't do is haul a deer out.
What kind of kayak you got, Ted?
I got a Sun Dolphin.
Sun Dolphin?
10-footer, yeah.
The thing right now is presently sitting in the passenger seat of his SUV, his Honda Pilot outside.
Oh, yeah, it's stuffed in there pretty tight.
Somehow you got the hatch closed with a kayak.
Well, that might be the perfect kayak. If we get a deer, if we need to take it out by water, we can just throw it in Ted's, tie it onto the back of one of ours, and haul it out that way. As long as you don't mind a little blood in your kayak.
Nope.
That works. Guy said the other day on Facebook that you could use a jet sled to do that.
Really?
The sled that we use to get deer out in the winter?
Sure.
That jet sled, he said you can put it right behind your yak. And
no kidding. That'll float and do it that way.
I saw that.
Good to know.
All right, so right now you're driving, you're headed down the road.
Aaron and I have hunted here collectively 3 times now in the last 2 weeks, and we've yet to see another bow hunter. We have seen a group of pheasant hunters, but that is probably not really going to affect what we're doing. And that's typically what we find this time of the year, is that most of the hunting pressure takes place during the first 2 weeks of November when people are taking their vacation. And then after the middle of the month, the hunting pressure seems to really fall off, and that's actually when we have some of our best hunts. So anyways, I'm excited to get down into this creek bottom. It looks like a perfect travel corridor to catch a buck cruising between bedding areas. If it's as good as it looks on the map, it should be a pretty interesting evening.
How's your wind blowing in that bottom like that? Was it kind of tricky down in there?
I mean, it seemed like I was kind of threading the needle with the wind. When I dropped down into the bottom, I was a little bit farther to the west. And I'll show it here on the map. At that point, I was just behind that ridge, and I was throwing milkweed. And sure enough, the wind was swirling right there. It was getting sucked back up towards that ridge. So I quickly worked my way to the east, where that ridge played out and flattened out into the bottom. And there I was getting a steady wind. And you can kind of see in the footage how flat and open it is right there in front of the stand, and the wind was coming from the south-southeast, which was perfect. You know, it was essentially threading the needle through that bottom.
That's usually what you got to do in low spots like that. If there's a chute or something that that the ditch forms and you have wind coming right down that. Looks like you had a dandy come by there.
Yeah, that was within 5 minutes of being on stand.
Self-filming couldn't get it.
Couldn't get it done. I mean, I could have zoomed the camera out wide and just and let it go, but trying to get a little bit better footage than that. So, yeah, it's part of self-filming.
Oh yeah. Okay, now you got a doe coming through. What's your elapsed time here since the buck, that nice one, came through?
Probably an hour. And there was a few other deer down in the bottom that I couldn't get on video that I would just catch glimpses of. I know there was a 2-year-old buck that I saw, and pretty much activity down in that bottom almost the entire evening.
Were they bedding down there, or were they just traveling through there?
Just traveling through there, yep.
I want to point out something. That buck is cruising in the middle of the afternoon. Mature buck, middle of November. We've seen over the years way more fully mature bucks actually cruising during the mid-morning, mid-afternoon, occasionally in the middle of the day. But
yeah, he basically came out of what I assumed was a bedding area on that ridge to the west. And the reason I set up where I did is because 3 days prior to this hunt, I had hunted about 300 yards down the creek bottom to the east, and I had went in blind that afternoon, and it wasn't a great setup. I didn't like that exact spot, but I did manage to see several does and fawns come off of a nearby ridge, and I could also hear a buck chasing a doe up there, so I assumed there was probably a family group of does and fawns that regularly bedded on that ridge. So I took that information, started looking at a map and trying to figure out a different spot to hunt that creek bottom, and I was looking farther to the west, and there's a big long ridge with a bunch of secondary ridges, and you can see on the aerial photo there's cedars, it's overgrown, there's thick cover, and there's no doubt in my mind deer are going to be bedding there as well. So I've identified 2 likely bedding areas. The creek bottom itself is a natural travel corridor, and then more specifically what I liked was how that big ridge falls off into the creek bottom and then plays out where those 2 ditches meet. So I figured there's probably going to be a major trail coming off that ridge, and there was going to be a crossing or several crossings there where those 2 ditches meet, and that was going to be a likely spot where a buck would cruise through as he was traveling from bedding area to bedding area. And it didn't take very long to find that out.
Oh, there's a buck right there.
by now it's 4:30 and you've seen another nice buck coming in here. Is he coming out of the same bedding area?
Same bedding area, yep.
Except he's coming to the tree.
Yep. He crossed in the exact same spot where that first buck did, but instead of staying down in the ditch, he came up on my side and got a lot closer.
Yeah.
It's going smooth up to this point, and this is where all heck breaks loose.
Things like at 5 yards.
Yeah, 7 or 8 yards. Didn't have a ton of cover either, but the buck obviously had somewhere in mind that he wanted to go, and then also going into a spot for the first time, never having hunted there before.
Right, catch him off guard.
Catch him by surprise.
Got him. Man, oh man, I cannot believe that worked out. That buck was 8 yards away. And just about everything that could go wrong did go wrong. I'm using Zach's release. And the one that I've always used, I've had it for probably close to 25 years. I lost it last week, and normally it just stays in position where I need it to. Well, I haven't practiced for self-filming with this release, and it hangs down and it's flopping there. and I cannot get a hold of it. So I'm struggling to get a hold of it and get it rotated and clipped on. Well, the deer walks out of frame again. So now
Yeah, that was a sad day losing that release.
Yeah,
I'd
that's
literally
so.
had that thing for 20-some years. I think it's laying somewhere out on public land in southern Iowa. Maybe in a parking lot. I'm not sure where it would have fallen off.
Well, you never know. We might find it again
We
someday.
might find it. I kind of have a love-hate relationship with self-filming. We didn't have enough people to go around for everybody to have a cameraman at that point, so I'm not going to stay out of the woods. But at the same time, my encounter with that deer was basically through a little screen.
Right.
He kind of caught me off guard as he's coming in, so I got to get, trying to get as good a footage of him as I can. So I'm concentrating on that, and then, with everything going wrong, it was stressing me out. And then all of a sudden he finally gets up there to 8 yards. I had to stop him or grunt at him before I was even, have my release on. I just needed him to stop because I was running out of room to be able to film him and still shoot. All I really remember of this deer is the few seconds of just whipping that bow back, getting the pin settled, and letting it go, and then was right back to filming him. So
I don't know. I mean, this spring when I was doing it turkey hunting and killed those couple birds there in Missouri, it was a rush that I hadn't had, turkey hunting in a while. I felt like I had no control of the situation, basically, that I was just at the mercy of what was going to happen,
Right.
And when they're coming in, especially when you're turkey hunting, and he gets inside of 30 yards and you take the safety off, if he's coming, like that his life is down to a few seconds at that point. But when I was filming myself, it was like, oh boy, what's about to go wrong here,
Yeah. Now, turkey hunting's nice because you can, if you have the decoy to take their attention away, it's easier to get the footage and kind of let go of the camera and maybe actually watch it for a little bit and kind of get that, that full experience. But with the deer hunting when they're just walking by on a trail, yeah, that's tough.
Yeah, I would have to say so.
I'd much rather have a cameraman in the tree.
Got to have a GoPro in that situation.
GoPro made all the difference in the world with being able to put a hunt together, to edit it and fill in the gaps, and also just to see the chaos that was going on.
Like
it'd be hard for people to understand how chaotic it was as the camera's too loose and then the release. Like it puts it all into perspective. So
got to have that wide angle view. You're self-filming, or even if you're filming with a buddy, it just helps illustrate what is going on.
Yeah, shows the big picture.
The interesting thing also, when we're getting ready to go in and help Greg get this deer out, is this spot wasn't terribly far off the road, if I remember correctly. Like it's in an area where there's lots of other public access around, and it's almost an overlooked spot. Like we kept talking about how we drove past that area over and over again, and we never saw any trucks parked up there.
Yep.
Probably because that's all it is just one little creek bottom draw that runs down through it. I mean, there's 4,000 or 5,000 acres just right there next door that you can go and get on, and that piece is relatively small, but we have success in those spots like that. Like you mentioned, you just have to keep an eye on where the pressure is at that given time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to constantly change, as you've seen throughout this hunt. In the early stages of it, Greg found pressure where it typically wasn't, and it totally changed the entire makeup of that spot. But finding this area and staying mobile is what puts you in a bunch of bucks.
Yeah, and we talk about not relying on just one area to hunt, but having plan B, C, just having a lot of backup options.
We spent a lot of time in the truck, in the car.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, just looking.
Some of the most valuable scouting is, scouting for pressure, and then also just, taking a day off every now and then, just driving around and seeing where deer are at.
Yeah.
You might, we've been surprised where we've seen them, or, picked up on a big buck somewhere and then found the nearest public land and tried to get in on them.
The thing I've noticed is they're just extremely adaptable no matter what. They know every inch of that public area, and they just have a knack for finding those little areas where people have not been recently.
Yeah. The interesting thing about the spot where I'd started out, where there's so much pressure that I decided to give up on it, going in there late season, the deer were back in there.
Mm-hmm.
The shotgun seasons had passed, and we had bitterly cold weather around the first of the year. People probably weren't getting out in the field much, and the deer had gravitated back to that area. It looked like a cattle food lot. Like there was just tracks and droppings everywhere from where the deer were in there and spending a lot of time feeding on that honey locust. Oh, deer cart.
That deer cart is just completely toast now. There's not dragging out another deer, I don't think.
No. Yeah, the 10th through the 16th was probably the best 6-day period of the season that we had.
That's the one thing, though, that is pretty consistent year to year, that we've seen is it always picks up around that time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, for the last 5 years, we've been hunting public land, in Iowa, and every year in Iowa at least, it's picked up for us around that time.
Yeah.
I mean, in the not just the hunts, but the trail camera pictures, like
Right.
you mentioned earlier,
Yep.
all say the same thing. I mean, those big mature bucks, especially the mature bucks, start cruising more. They just become more active.
Mm-hmm.
I got a question.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, when you get into a tree stand, do you usually pick spots out and range them beforehand, or do
Oh
you?
yeah, absolutely. I was actually just thinking about that. That's something that I do every time. Is, try to range.
So do we, but like I've seen people that seems like every time a deer comes by, they're ranging it every time.
Right.
Which, with what I like to do and whatever, we pick spots before.
Yeah, anything you can
too
do
late.
to and minimize the amount of messing around that you're doing when it comes to the moment of truth is.
That one obviously was
Yeah,
right
I
when you got up there.
Just
but
been in the stand for a few minutes and hadn't even got to that point yet. But yeah.
This was actually one of the more brutal drags that we had.
Yeah.
That
Probably
we've had
should've-
in recent memory.
Probably should have included more footage to show that. It was tough going up that hill through the CRP.
The cart already had a bum leg going in there with that bent wheel,
Yeah.
and it just got worse, throughout that whole drag out. I mean, we got to look into, at some point, quartering the deer
Yeah.
potentially and taking it out of the woods and hang him and quarter
Yep.
him, because we had the people there that could have
Mhm.
packed him out.
Yeah.
You know,
Got a couple
easy
frame
enough.
packs. It wouldn't have been any big deal.
That was a deal, getting him out. And one thing that you guys didn't see in this video is we got checked by a game warden.
That's right.
As soon as we got back to the parking lot that night.
Yep.
He'd been sitting up there waiting on us all night.
Yeah, we saw the vehicle there. Maybe even still had his lights on or something.
Yep.
But he came out of, he had been hiding in the brush just off to the side. And once a few of us got back to the parking lot, he came out of the brush and. I think they
walking
try to
around
get the drop on you and try to make you nervous right away.
Yeah,
But,
I was walking around his truck, like looking in there, and like, man, it's definitely, an agent, because he got the laptop screen
Right.
shining in there and everything. And I'm like, he's not in the truck. And then all of a sudden, here he comes. He just pops up out of the bushes, But super nice guy.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
checked out, obviously, and he went about his business after we talked to him about deer hunting in the area for a little bit.
Yep.
But
Yeah, nice guy.
that was a sweet hunt, Greg. I mean, that's a picture-perfect rut hunt.
So, yeah, it was a fun hunt. Hopefully I don't have to do much self-filming this fall. I would rather not, but
Hopefully not.
it made it work on that hunt.
Well, that's going to do it for this episode, guys. Thank you all for joining us. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe below. And, yeah, we'll have some more content coming to you real soon. Take care. See you next time.